for providing some discounts for our members, making this a really fun meetup. Thank you. Our first speaker is Slava Akhmechet. Is that close enough? Okay. From RethinkDB. He's going to tell us a little bit about their product. And then after that, we'll have some Q&A with Brad Green, which I'm really excited about. I reached out to Brad probably a year ago before the last NG-Conf, and timing just never worked out while they were here. They were too busy. And so I thought, well, next year we'll ask him again. So for me, this has been 1 year in the making. You guys just knew about this like 3 weeks ago, but I'm really excited. I've been anticipating this for a while. So we'll turn some time over to Slava and then to Brad.
All right. Hey guys, my name is Slava. I'm one of the founders at RethinkDB and CEO. I'm very excited to be here. We just flew into Salt Lake City this morning, and it's a really, really beautiful place. So thank you all for coming out. What I'd like to do today is tell you about RethinkDB. You know, we have about 15 minutes together. I'll tell you how we started the project, you know, why we started it, what we do for people, and how it works. And I'll do a little bit of a live demo. Okay, so let's get started. RethinkDB is an open source scalable database for the real-time web. And what we do is we make it very easy for people to build real-time applications. So we started the project because we noticed that the world is really moving towards real-time, and many of the applications are becoming more and more real-time. So what does that mean? For example, suppose you're building a collaborative app for web designers, like a WYSIWYG app. So you have a project, and a web designer can kind of do a mock-up of the web page, and you know, other designers can participate in the same project. And let's say one of them takes an image and like clicks on it and moves it to a different location. Okay, so everybody who is on that project, all the other designers that are looking at other browsers, they need to see that image moving in real time. Right? That's an example of a real-time app. And we noticed that something like this shows up like everywhere. So collaborative applications are a good example, like you know this web app, or if you ever use Google Docs where people can modify documents and other people can see them live. Real-time analytics that shows up all the time. Multiplayer games is an example, like if you have a character that's moving in a game world and you know, other players need to see that character move, like this shows up everywhere. Okay, so the problem we noticed is that building these apps is really hard. And the question is, like, how do you push that data, right? How do you build the infrastructure to make it work? So on the browser, there's actually pretty tremendous technology and a lot of innovation to make that possible. So WebSockets have been in most browsers for a while, and WebSockets are great for pushing data from the web server into the browser live. And if you're building a single-page app, like there's just absolutely tremendous frameworks to make it really easy to build dynamic kind of reactive experiences. So Angular is just absolutely phenomenal at this. If you have the data and you want to make that experience real time, it's really easy on the browser. But we noticed that it's really, really hard to do that on the data layer, because most databases weren't designed for this kind of a use case. Like most databases are request response. You send a query, get a result. And it used to work really well on the web because that's how HTTP works. You send a request, get a response. But WebSockets don't work that way, right? You have to push data to the browser, and databases don't do that for you. So, you know, if you're building like a multiplayer game and you want to push out updates to people on how the players move, one obvious way to do it is, you know, you could, whenever someone moves their character, you record that, and then you can poll the database. And people very quickly discovered that that works for a while, but the moment you get like more than 5 players, that's really hard to do. It's really hard to scale, right? It just kind of crumbles under its own weight. And we don't really have time to go into all the different architectures that people use to get around the scalability problem, but it's a really difficult challenge. It involves a lot of infrastructure, a lot of engineering resources, and it's hard to build. Okay, so we set out to solve that problem. What RethinkDB does is it pushes JSON to your apps in real time. For example, you can write a query, and I'll show you how this works. You can write a query, get the result set just like you would in any other database, and you can also subscribe to change notifications. So whenever there is a change in the database, RethinkDB will tell your application, like, hey, something changed. And then you can update the web browser in real time. So let's actually look at how that works. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this better. OK, I hope this is better. And you can see the cursor. I'll be pointing at things. So let's say you have a multiplayer game, and you want to build a real-time leaderboard, right? Like you want to show, here's my top 3 players in my game world. You know, I want to show that to my users. So let's look at an example of how to do that in RethinkDB. And this example actually is not real-time. And I'll show you how you can convert this code in a second to make it real-time. So I don't have time to go into the query language of the product, but it's pretty similar to MongoDB if you've ever used that. It's similar to jQuery. You can chain commands on each other to transform data. And the way this query works is we're saying, I hope you can see the cursor. We're saying, look at the table gameplays, order by score. You know, order all the documents in the table by score in descending order, and get me top 3 documents. And the result you're going to get is just a JSON array with 3 documents that are top players in your game. So we have, you know, Coffee Mug at 500 points, Kitty Butt at 450, and Mike G at 410. Okay, so you can, you know, you write this query, you get the result, you get the JSON document in the web server, you push it out to the browser, and you present it in, you know, in Angular. Okay, but suppose you want to make this real time. Whenever someone finishes a game and you get a better player than one of the existing 3 that are on top, how do you update the leaderboard in real time? How do you find out? That's the problem we solve. And the way we do it is by introducing, and I think I have to zoom in again. Nope. Sorry about that. Okay, the way we do it is by introducing a changes command. So you write a query exactly in the same way as you would have written a query for a non-real-time application. You say, get me all the gameplays, order by score in descending order, and get me top 3. But if you add a changes command, what RethinkDB will do is it will send you the initial data, just like before, but at that point, it won't terminate the connection. It will keep it open. And then anytime any player writes anything to the database, the engine in the database will recalculate all the queries that are open, and will say, OK, did anything change for this query? And if it didn't, you don't get anything. But if you get a player that gets a better score, you get a notification that looks like this. It's going to tell you, you know, the old document that you have to get rid of is Mike G. He used to have a score of 410. That's been replaced by a player called Carl, who got 430 points. So the database will push that JSON update out to your application, and then you can push it via WebSockets to the web browser and update the leaderboard in real time. And RethinkDB completely takes care of scalability, takes care of recalculating all these queries, of routing, of all the issues. So all the infrastructure is built into the database product, which makes it just dramatically easy to build apps like this. Okay? So what I'd like to do now is really quickly show you a live demo of the product, just to give you an idea how you can get started. It's really easy, and give you sort of the feel for how these queries work. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to do is start RethinkDB. And it's pretty easy. I've just started the server. And the database server comes with an administration console that's built in, so you can point the browser at the server and get a little console. I'm going to do that now. And this is just an easy way to kind of play with queries interactively. So I have to point my browser to localhost 8080. Zoom in a little bit. Can everyone see that? Is that good? Yep. OK. OK, so this is the admin console of RethinkDB. It lets you configure the cluster, shard tables, lots of interesting stuff, but we're not going to focus on that today. I'm going to go to a tab called Data Explorer. And Data Explorer is just an easy way to type queries and experiment with queries. So we don't have time to go into a full example of how to build a leaderboard, but you could take the code in the presentation and paste it, and it would work. But what I'm going to do is show you something a little bit different. I have a bunch of jobs. I have a script, Python script, that's doing some jobs that inserting things into the database. And RethinkDB comes with a system table that lets you observe all the jobs in the product, right? So what I'm going to do is type r.db RethinkDB. And that's a special database that contains a bunch of system tables that let you monitor the cluster, configure the cluster, things like that. And one of the tables in it is called jobs. So dot table jobs. And this table shows us the data in this table is all the jobs that are currently running in the database. So for example, if you have long-running queries, you're going to see that here. Let me zoom in a little more. And I'm going to run this query. And when I scroll down, the result is this JSON document. And it doesn't actually matter for the purposes of this talk what's in it. Like, it's really meant for system administrators. But it's going to tell you the duration of the job, what it is, what client's running it, things like that. So this is pretty standard. You could do this in most databases, right? You can run a query, get a result. So what I'd like to do now is show you how the changes command works. So if you remember, the changes command lets you get push notifications in your application whenever something changes in the database. So the jobs table right now keeps getting updated because I got my script running in the background. And what I'm going to do is type .changes. So exactly the same query, right? You just add the .changes command at the end. I'm going to run this, and you see the database is listening for events here, and the data is updating, right? So I'm going to pause this for a second. And if you look at the data, it's what we saw in the presentation. You have the new value, sorry, the old value, which is the job that was just running, and the new value, which is null, which means the job just ended, right? And anytime there is a new query, you can write this thing and get push notifications saying, here's what's changing in the database cluster. And actually, this web UI is built with this functionality, so you could build monitoring tools that will push information about what's going on in the database. But this is just an example. Like, anytime you build an app, if you build a game or a collaborative app, anytime someone writes to the database, you can write any query called .changes on it, and will push notifications out to you to make building real-time apps really easy. So okay, so just to summarize, RethinkDB is the first open source scalable database built specifically for real-time apps. And it does two things. It really does one thing. It lets you write queries and pushes JSON notifications out to you whenever something about the query changes. So it recomputes the values internally, and you just get information that you need. And what that does is it makes it dramatically easier to build real-time apps. So you can download the product. I encourage you to do it at rethinkdb.com. It's very easy to get started, very easy to learn, and to start building apps. We've got over 35,000 developers using it, and it's the second most popular database on GitHub after Redis. And we're working really hard to beat Redis, but it's hard because it's an amazing piece of software. And if you like the talk, I encourage you to tweet about it. On Twitter, we're at rethinkdb.com. If you have any questions, feel free to ping us on Twitter or GitHub, and we're always there to answer. Okay, thank you. So I don't know if we have time for a couple of questions, or yeah? Okay, does anyone have any questions about this? Yep. Sorry, what was the last? You said, how does this work with integrating? Calling out to other APIs, you mean like from the database itself? Okay, so we have a command in the database. So I showed you things like table and insert and update. We have a command called r.http. And HTTP lets you make any HTTP call anywhere. So you could do post requests and get requests, and you can integrate it with other APIs. And interestingly, so there is no protocol for real-time apps right now. So Meteor, if you guys, I don't know if you're familiar with it, they have a protocol called DDP that's sort of the alternative to REST that makes it kind of more palatable for building real-time apps. And there have been a bunch of integrations with DDP and RethinkDB. But this is kind of an evolving like standard in the community. And I would be very excited to see like kind of a standardized protocol like REST, but for real-time applications. But that doesn't really exist right now. So there's some things we do to make it easy, but it hasn't quite like materialized as an industry standard. Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah, perfect sense. So the question is, how do you keep yourself from shooting? How do you keep yourself from shooting yourself in the foot by opening a lot of connections because you want all of your data to be real time? So this is actually a great question. This was designed with that in mind. So the idea is to make building these apps really easy. It's just absolutely trivial to build an app if anytime you have a browser connection, like a user, types your website address or your app address in the browser and goes to the app. It's very easy to build it if you can open a connection per user. And you could fundamentally, you could have millions of users concurrently. Your app would be very successful if that happened, and that's great. So the thing really needs to scale. And we thought a lot about this, and the product is designed, so this is kind of a deep question, but usually databases use threading. So anytime you open a connection to the database, it opens a thread under the hood. And a thread is fundamentally a pretty heavy object to keep around. So we don't do that. We open a thread per core, and everything else is based with custom-built green threads, like basically coroutines. So you could open tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of connections and just keep them open. And the thing will continue working, and you'll keep getting pings within a few milliseconds. So it's pretty scalable, and it's designed to be scalable. I don't think you can shoot yourself in the foot by opening too many connections like that. Does that make sense? Yep. Yes, that's exactly right. It's similar to the difference between PHP and Node. So people found workarounds for PHP, right? There's stuff like fast CGI and things like that kind of make it work, but not quite. And Node just fixes that problem. So this is built in C++, but it's very much inspired by the same kind of philosophy where you have these green threads and callbacks internally. So you don't have to worry about that as a user, but it integrates really nicely with Node. Okay, I think maybe one more question. Okay.
Is there a way to extend it so you can have rich data types graph or anything I'm trying to think of data types I want. Maybe I want to watch a piece of graph and see it change.
So the question is there any way to extend this with more complex data types like graphs, if you want to, for example, watch a piece of a graph? So Rethink isn't really meant to be a graph database. You can use it for graphs, but it will be similar to using Postgres for graphs, where you could do it, but it's hard and it's kind of clunky, and some of our users have done it. And you could write a query saying, I want to watch this piece, and it will work, but it's not as good as a dedicated graph database like Neo4j. And so Neo4j doesn't support live updates like this, so you kind of have to pick what you care about more. It's pretty hard. We do support some complex data types, like, for example, geospatial stuff. So you could open a change feed and say, give me all the events that are happening within 5 miles of this point, and it will compute all the geospatial, polygon stuff, and will send you the data. You could also do it with time series. You could do it with binary data, not with graphs, unfortunately. Okay, thank you guys very much.
All right, we'll go into some Q&A with Brad Green now. I was hoping we'd have some mic stands. We don't. So I'm going to be sitting on this corner right here with a mic. And Matt Winchester, if you can raise your hand, we'll be sitting on a corner right here with a mic. If you just kind of want to line up in the aisles as you have questions, we'll hand you the mic. Brad, if you want to chair probably, and you can just sit down and
I can stand.
Whichever is more comfortable for you.
Mic I should use?
And then there's this one right here. You can just hook on your belt and.
And when you use the mic, make sure you're speaking directly into it. Put it down here. It doesn't pick up very well. So just speak into it clearly so we can all hear you.
Switches. Okay. Hi. Hey, I'm Brad Green, and I work on the Angular project at Google. I started it with Mishko Hevry about somewhere mid-2009. We saw it on the outside about early 2010. And So if I was one of you guys, I would think that Matt and the other organizers here are sort of heroes for putting their spare time together to put conferences like the little mini conferences like this together. From my perspective, he's a pain in the ass because he's been asking me for a year to come to this thing. And I have to give a keynote at NGConf on Thursday morning. Of course, I'm not done with it. So here's how we can make everything work out. You guys ask me super hard questions about Angular, and I will put that into my keynote, and then all the hard questions will be answered. Everyone will go home happy. So that's your job. I thought maybe I would start by just talking a little bit about what we're working on and kind of how we're thinking about the problem space we're in as a seed for our conversation tonight. And you know, we've been working on this project for about 5 years now. And when we started off, we really wanted to solve some of the big problems in building web applications, trying to make things simpler, reducing boilerplate, making some default structure available for writing applications so I don't have to invent it every time I come to an application. And then making things like testability, like kind of the unloved parts of development, more loved and easier to do. And I think we came up with some really interesting idioms for making this happen. Like, I call them the 3 Ds, like dependency injection, directives, and data binding, maybe. And you know, it wasn't clear when we started that we would be doing this for 5 years, maybe. And here we are. And we kind of wondered, like maybe 2 years ago, we wondered, well, do we have anything else to say? And I think we do. And that's what this conference is all about this week. And how many people is anyone going? Actually going? A couple of you? Okay. If you're not, I'm glad to see some of you are going, and please, we can hang out there. If you're not going, it's available via live stream. You can just go to ngconf-org or ng-conf.org, and the live stream will be available. I think there are some local places you can go sit with other like-minded folks. And what we're going to talk about is, what is Angular today? What are we working on for folks who are using the Angular 1 branch? And then we're talking about what will Angular be in the very near future, what we're calling Angular 2. And what you'll see in the keynote, and by the way, I'm happy to answer almost any question about what I'm going to say in the keynote. It's fine. It's an open source project. I'll spill the beans. It's cool. There is one surprise we'll hold back just to get you to tune in. So what we're going to talk about is the story. Like, what are we doing for folks today? What's coming up in Angular 1.4? We are going to announce there will be a 1.5 release, and we want you guys to feel like, A, I'm well supported in Angular today, and there's actually a pretty nice migration path and a big reason why I would want to migrate to Angular 2 in the near future when it comes out. Interesting that we're here talking about this because we kind of announced this plan at a conference in Europe in October. And a lot of the reaction was, why are you changing my thing? You know, yeah, nice ideas. Yes, I like faster, I like simpler, but just build it into Angular 1 for me. And this is a hard thing. And we can talk about like why this is. And it's kind of though like, I've got a nice internal combustion car and I want an electric car. And maybe you could start adding some batteries. Well, that's not going to work out. Maybe I add the electric engine, also not really going to work out. Anyway, so I've talked too much by myself. I would love to take your questions as long as you'll have me. Who wants to start? Back there.
So we can hear you. I'm not going to come to you. Around the front corners.
These guys are the mic stands.
Okay. Our office is using Angular. Are we on 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3? I don't know. Anyway, I don't actually work that much in the front end, but I know there's a lot of heartburn right now and a lot of questions about removing data binding with 2. Could you explain a little bit about why we're removing data binding and what replaces the data binding concept in Angular 2?
Okay, so Angular 2, we're not removing any of the concepts, and particularly not data binding. Data binding is absolutely there in Angular 2. So, and I think there is a lot of confusion, so I'm glad you asked this question. Very nice. So in Angular 2, we are changing the way data binding works. And where in Angular 1, you can have different parts of your application data bind to really anything. which is cool because I don't really have to think too much when I'm starting a project, and it can grow organically. In Angular 2, we're building what we're calling a unidirectional data flow, where the top-level components of your application can propagate changes to your children, but it can never go back. You can never create cycles. And so this does two things. One is it makes it a little faster because we don't have to do multiple passes over it to have all the changes affected each other and re-affected each other through the cycles. And it also makes the kind of debugging and tracing of the application easier because I know it only goes this direction. So it's there. It's going to be there. All that concept that you know and love of data binding is still there in Angular 2. Next, please.
For anyone who knows me, this is going to be the question you last expect me to ask. What about legacy browser support moving forward? Because right now you've dropped, isn't it, everything IE8 and below in 1.3?
In 1.3, we dropped IE8. That's right.
Okay. So what's the story moving forward? And my particular concern is that there are not Internet Explorer, but there are devices like the Wii U and other kind of entertainment systems, Xbox, etc., that I've developed an interest for creating for. And so I do have a concern about that because I know those browsers are not necessarily cutting edge or necessarily going to be updated for the next 10 years.
Yes, yes. So we haven't picked the exact browser support matrix for Angular 2. Are you talking about Angular 2 specifically or Angular 1?
Both, actually.
Okay. So it turns out that for embedded devices, these folks are very slow to upgrade. And actually, I'll throw Android under the bus as well. The old Android web view, it's the new IE8, right? So we haven't picked the set that we're going to support, but we do want to have a really good story for mobile and maybe embedded devices. And I actually don't know what we're going to decide on. But if you've got some data that could show us what that landscape looks like, that might be helpful.
Okay, so when you say that, how would I bring that to your attention if I had it, which I don't currently?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter.
Okay.
At Bradley Green.
All right, sounds good.
I'd love to see it.
So with AngularJS and Angular Dart, I guess I've heard some feelings like, okay, AngularJS is going to get abandoned. So could you maybe address that?
Okay, so the question is, do I have a subversive plan to make you use Dart? Is that the question? Yeah, okay, that's the question. Okay. No, I actually have a subversive plan to make you use Xat Script, but that's a different story. So we on the Angular team are we're community driven, and the community is broad. And some people want to use what we could call plain vanilla JavaScript, ES5 today. Some people want to use ClojureScript, like I want a nice sort of Lisp derivative in the browser that does functional programming and things like that. And other people want types in JavaScript. And other people might want to use other languages. So we want to support all these variations. And we wrote a version for Dart because unlike, say, CoffeeScript, whose semantics are exactly the same as JavaScript, it's just sort of syntactical sugar, Dart actually has different semantics. And so there were a bunch of teams at Google, because Dart is a project we support at Google, who wanted to use Angular with Dart. And they threw me a bunch of ability to hire and said, look, if you could hire folks to write on Dart, we will give you this headcount. And so I was like, sure, I will do that. And so this has actually been a big boon for me on the Angular team. And one of the things we'll talk about tomorrow at the keynote, though, is I had this problem in that I ended up with two teams, one building the Dart version of Angular and one building the JavaScript version of Angular. And this was kind of cool. And the idea was that we would maybe share tests and get them to sync up and always have kind of a consistent version. Well, it never worked out. And so what we ended up with was two teams, both innovating differently, both having, one might have greater performance, one might have greater features. And it was very not cool in common speech. So what we've decided to do is we write everything in this It's basically ECMAScript 6 plus TypeScript types plus some metadata style annotations that we're calling AtScript. And we cross-compile to today's JavaScript, ES5, ES6, TypeScript, AtScript, but then also to Dart from our core language. And so what you get now is a giant team, one that's excuse me, double the size of what we had before. Building, performance, ITN, accessibility, all these things. We've actually learned a lot from the Dart team, and the Dart team's actually helped us with things. Like they helped us, they rewrote our parser. Like these are the guys who wrote the Java hotspot VM a long time ago, and they built Google's V8 JavaScript virtual machine, very sharp. And so they've actually been helping us rewrite parts of Angular and making it better. And so on the JavaScript side, we're benefiting from all these concepts. We'll talk about another library that we've produced called Zone.js, which gives us the ability to manage the event stack frames of the virtual machine in the browser. And so the result you'll see, and this was in Dart, and we actually ported it to JavaScript. And so what you'll see for Angular 2 is you no longer have to call $apply when you're dealing with other evented libraries. Cool stuff. So yeah, exactly. Super cool. So anyway, you should like it that we're supporting multiple languages. We learn from all of them. Like I personally am a fan of Clojure, and we learn from the functional programming stuff. And the more we can know, the better.
Is Angular 2 going to support server-side rendering?
Will Angular 2 support server-side rendering? We don't. Well, we do have some people working on it. So Angular 2 is very different than Angular 1 in that, Angular 2 you write directives directly touching the DOM in the browser, and in Angular 2 we have this new abstraction layer that we're calling views. And views allow us to decouple the rendering from the DOM. Now it turns out the primary rendering case is the DOM, and that's what ships with Angular by default. But we have some interesting ideas. Now that we can decouple against this abstraction layer of the view, we could do interesting things like maybe put Angular in a web worker so that it doesn't impede the rendering thread and your app could be super fast. Might be nice on low-power mobile devices. Might be nice on the desktop even. It also means if I don't have to render to the DOM, maybe I could render to a virtual DOM on the server and then do server-side pre-rendering. We can also do an interesting little trick where we pre-compile all of the work that the Angular compiler would do on the server and send it over and don't even have a compiler in the client anymore. And then one last cool trick we can do is and I'm completely being speculative here because why not? How about something other than DOM? We could render to Canvas. We could render to WebGL. We could render to iOS native widgets. All kinds of fun things could happen. Could we render to the React virtual DOM? Probably not to the React virtual DOM. And actually, there's probably no need for it. But maybe we could render to the React native components on iOS and Android. That might be a thing.
Sorry. You mentioned now you have this giant team, and you also have hundreds of developers contributing through GitHub to your repo. I was just interested to know what some of the challenges and trials you guys have had in trying to maintain order and continuing your vision while also inspiring the community to help out and manage your team.
That's a great question. How do we? So there's been over 1,000 contributors to the Angular project. So thank you for any of you who've contributed. That's awesome. And scaling it is this is one of the things we work on a lot. And I credit Igor, one of my partners, Igor Minar, for being the brain behind how do we scale the Angular open source project. And we've done it very slowly, where we've built up trust with some individuals. And so one early example would be Pete Bacon-Darwin. And Pete is doesn't work at Google, but he's now the lead for the Angular 1 projects. He lives in London. We've recently pulled some other folks into Angular Core who don't work for Google, and we've just built up enough trust with them. And so the idea is we want to have enough work experience with individuals so that we can trust them to be in Angular Core, have commit access, all of these things, so that they can then spread the way we do business, our culture, to anybody else who wants to be part of it. We're doing it slowly. We've just started to do it with some corporations who are sponsoring some of their folks. Like they bet big on Angular. They sponsor some of their folks to work full-time on Angular, and bringing some folks in this way. Up here.
In some of the communications, Angular 2 has been described as a reactive system, and I believe there are some optimizations made to detect immutable components and only update them as necessary. But you touched briefly on Clojure being an inspiration and other functional programming languages like that. If I, as a developer, want to exploit immutability in terms of not just optimization benefits, but as a design pattern, and really control my state, how do I accomplish that in Angular 2?
Right, yeah. So Angular 2 has a completely new data binding system. And should I be worried? Okay, so Angular 2 has a completely new data binding system that it has pluggable strategies for the way we get at data. And there's a default strategy, which is basically what we have in Angular 1, although it's much, much faster. One of the strategies that we have built is for taking advantage of mutable data. We also have one for observables and promises. And we can optimize, we can actually allow other folks like who might have a nice database, like the Rethink folks, that might have a nice, have a way to do sort of client to server side synchronization and know how to make object updates fast. And we want this to be possible so that, you know, if you've got a special object type that you know how to access quickly, you can plug it in. But yes, for immutable data types, what you'll see is that, you know, data binding, there is a cost. And although we've made it much faster in Angular 2, it's still sort of order n. But if you use immutable data, now you go to order 1, and things get very quick. So yes, we love the idea of immutable data. You could use something like immutable.js, and we can take advantage of that in Angular 2.
Hi, how are you?
Hey.
My name is Pearson. My friend and I are about to invest a whole bunch of time and resources into building an application, and we've chosen Angular to do so. Is it smart to dive and commit to such a task in Angular 1 currently, and then switch over to Angular 2 when it comes out, or should we wait a little bit longer and invest in Angular 2?
So it's a good question. I think you have to make the decision, but I'll tell you a couple things. We want it to be very easy and attractive for you to migrate to Angular 2. So we're going to do everything in our power to make that possible. So if you do start on Angular 1 today, we're going to be building bits in Angular 1.5 to make it easier. We speculatively think we can build some tooling to automate some of it. And then certainly we're going to be building guides for just explaining how the process works. If you were to wait, or if you wanted to say, well, I want to start on Angular 2, like I'll just wait a bit. I never tell you when it's going to be done because I don't know. But I can tell you, like, we released alpha last month, and I'll tell you where the new documentation is at ngconf later this week. Not that I'm hiding it, but it's not quite done, and they're working on it. And I have a team who's going to be migrating a very large app to Angular 2 starting in May. So I'm not saying it will be done. It might be very far from done. But we're going to be betting that we can actually do an app migration and start real work in Angular 2 around there. It really depend on where your sensitivity is for lack of documentation. So there's this cool project called Google Polymer that lets you, create, reusable web components. And being both backed by Google, what's the relationship between the Polymer team and the Angular team? And do you see conflicts, or what's going to be the relationship working forward between reusable Polymer components and directives in AngularJS?
That's a good question. So we've spent a long time making Angular 2 work well with web components. But Angular 1 kind of does, but you quickly get into edge cases on complex components that are just not going to work out. And part of the problem is in Angular 1, we bind to attributes, and web components is all about binding to properties. And that's what we do in Angular 2. Which is really cool because all kinds of directives go away when I can bind to properties. Instead of having ng-show, ng-hide, I just bind to the hidden property on any element. So we have great support for web components in Angular 2. So if you want to use Polymer or Xtags or any of the other web components, it's out of the box easy. It's a really cool vision because folks like Telerik or Wijmo or any of these other folks who have ported their or wrapped their component suites for Angular specifically, they no longer have to do that. They can build their suite one time, and if you want to use React, you can use the same web components as you use Angular, as you use Ember, as you use anybody else who will support web components. I actually don't know if those other people support web components. I assume they will. So that's the vision, and I think it's really, really cool. I think for if you are an all Angular project, and you already have a big investment in Angular components, then maybe you don't care. But in Angular 2, you can mix and match, and you can have some directives and have some web components, and as you see fit.
I have a more general question. So web frameworks have this really long history, right? Like there used to be CGI and then PHP and JSP and ASP.NET. And, if you zoom out from the web and just look at like helping people build user experiences, there was like Microsoft's MFC and just a million different things. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, like in the early days of Angular, how much did you guys pay attention to all of that stuff? Like did you study what they've done? And, or did you just like go off in your own direction, did your own thing? So, and also how much do you pay attention to that now?
Good question. So I feel like I'm older than a lot of folks. And I started off at this company called Next, where we built we called it client server back then. And you actually built, hardwired versions you had to deliver both to the client and the server. And that was my background going into this. And I feel like when we went to the web, we lost a lot of that. We lost a lot of the expertise that we built up about how to write good applications. And we've been kind of slowly clawing our way back towards kind of a rational model for building real apps. And that was a lot of the idea behind putting testability at the core of Angular, putting some default structure there. Data binding was kind of a new concept. We didn't invent data binding for sure, but that was kind of new for popular frameworks. In Angular 2, this is a lot of the impetus for this view type architecture that we're developing. Rather than writing to the low-level DOM, which was built for documents, could we write to a higher level application-oriented abstraction? And so yes, I think we like, and then for people who have done good things in the past, like MFC and Silverlight and Adobe with a lot of the products, Macromedia before, you find a lot of the same concepts in Angular, and it's not an accident. So we try and copy all of the good ideas, and I think you'll see in Angular 2 we're copying a lot more good ideas.
Hi.
So I work on a lot of enterprise applications, and I'm kind of an Ajax evangelist. But as working with Java developers, JavaScript's always been the one that they try to avoid. And Google kind of created some of the problem with GWT and some of these other frameworks to allow them to create Ajax type of apps. So what do you tell Java or enterprise developers that have this kind of attitude where it is now with other frameworks like JWT or Ph.D versus Angular? Where do you see that going, and are they becoming obsolete and they need to jump on the bandwagon?
Let me ask a follow-up question. Do you think this is more about the language, or is it about something else in the architecture?
I think it's more about the language.
Right. It's like I know this language and I love my Java or whatever my language is.
Same with, you get the same arguments between the .NET developers versus Java. And I'm like you. I've been here around a long time that I learned lots of languages, so it's just another language.
Yeah. Now I see this too. I think like there's whole swaths of folks who have grown up only doing iOS development and they don't know anything about the web. And this is maybe where I might say there are some options that can come into play. So if you are a Java developer who really likes the IDE experience, where I can get nice refactoring, where I can get code completion, where I can get the code trace through abilities, then some of the options for typed languages in the browser are a pretty good idea. One of them is TypeScript, and another one of them is Dart, and there's probably some other ones that I don't know about. But I might say that, hey, look at these things. I think TypeScript is probably for folks who actually, I really like JavaScript. I just want to have some types for these additional benefits. I can have contracts between my various groups, and I get these IDE benefits. And I think Dart is more for maybe for the Java developers who I really want a nicely crafted environment who was kind of thought from the ground up by this similarly minded folks, but maybe fix some of the problems around Java. But I think there are options to get anybody who wants to be able to participate in that world.
Today I was working with somebody, or more not working, but just looking at what they were doing with some of the alpha Angular 2 that you guys have up on GitHub. And he was showing me a little bit how he was building components and how it worked with the Shadow DOM. And I thought it was really an interesting approach, but I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit more about the Shadow DOM and how it compares with components and how CSS kind of fits into that.
Okay, yeah. So Shadow DOM is this new abstraction that allows me to isolate CSS from different parts of my application. It's really good when I might have widgets defined by different parts of my company or different companies altogether. If I want to import a set of widgets from the outside, traditionally CSS can clobber whatever unknowingly, and Shadow DOM addresses this issue. And so the idea is how do we build a more sort of safe system where I can have isolation of components that can only see the boundaries of their little piece of DOM. I might have forgotten the second part of your question. Can you remind me what it was? I kind of answered it. Okay, good. All right. Now in Angular 1, we don't use Shadow DOM because it wasn't around when we designed it. Angular 2, we use it out of the box. There are some performance problems with Shadow DOM, particularly in where you have to emulate it. And so we have this sort of Shadow DOM light thing that doesn't have the performance problems, and it's on by default. So the deal is you get to write your components in this nicely protected Shadow DOM sort of world when you write in Angular 2. And as it gets implemented in all the browsers, then we can just take advantage of the native implementations.
This kind of goes along the lines of a couple questions ago about other frameworks, but I guess one of the common frustrations that I'm hearing recently is just the sheer number of JavaScript frameworks that are being announced and developed. I guess the question is, what is the Angular team doing specifically with Angular 2 to consolidate the JavaScript framework world rather than fragment it?
It's not been one of my goals, actually. I understand the frustrations. Like, which one should I pay attention to, right? Like, what should I be using new framework X that's just come out? And I think like everyone has people create new frameworks because they have a different experience in life and they have a different take on the way we could build things. And so I think if I was trying to evaluate this, I would try to get really clear about what do I care about in a JavaScript framework, and then go ask those questions of that framework. And so if I'm going to talk about like what's good about Angular, I would say it's a very rich environment. So there aren't too many frameworks out there who say, I've got a complete story for accessibility, for internationalization. I come with a default set of rich UX widgets. We have this thing called material design. That testability is at the core. A lot of things like that. I think there's, question about performance, like how quick can I get my application? And you should ask a couple different questions because performance is not one thing and it's fairly hard to measure. So for your particular use case, like am I going to be deploying to mobile devices? In which case I not only care about the raw speed, but I also care about how much memory is being generated. So, because you don't want to have garbage collection cycles slowing down your application scrolling. So there's some complex questions to answer, but that's how I would approach it.
I got a couple for you.
Good.
So you mentioned that you'll be able to use web components by default in Angular 2.0, which is really awesome to hear. The follow-up question, will Angular 2.0 by default be completely web component compatible to like throw inside a Browserify or Webpack or these other bundling modules that basically bundle your components and give you an easy to serve up JavaScript packet?
Oh, okay. So you're talking about modules now. I think. Yes. So yes.
Basically, common JS or AMD syntax support.
Yeah. So as far as the syntax support, we're going to be going with ES6 modules. So in the next version of JavaScript, there is a common module specification, and we're going to be implementing that. If you're already using Browserify or AMD or some of these other there are shimming systems that allow you to kind of join multiple modules and as a bridge, but my hope is that we all get over to be using the one that will be standard in the browser really quickly.
So second question, you mentioned quite a bit about things you can do extra to really try to pick up performance in Angular 2.0, which has been a huge concern at all the enterprises I've dealt with, basically almost a deal breaker in a lot of cases. The performance issues with the dirty checking, hitting too many watches, trying to manage all that. So by default in Angular 2.0, where does performance sit on your priorities? Like just out of the box performance, not have to wrestle the pig in the mud to make it squeal like you want it to.
Yeah.
I just made that up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
It's terrible.
Nice visual I got. Maybe I'll use it on my slides.
Please do.
I've got some really nice graphs to show you on Thursday. And you're going to be really happy. And basically, the story is out of the box, it's extraordinarily fast. Extraordinarily fast. And then if you use immutable data structures, data binding's free.
So like breaking tons of watches, huge lists, no longer really a problem?
No, not a problem. Solved.
Great.
So I wanted to ask a little bit more about Xat Script and kind of your reasons for writing yet another transpiled language. There's Tracer, 6-to-5, TypeScript, CoffeeScript, all these. And I kind of like the ActionScripts / Objective-C that you've thrown into AskScript, but I'm curious just your reasoning for doing that.
It's funny you say that. So I started with Objective-C, and Mishko worked at Macromedia on ActionScript. So we're building these things because we've always been trying to get JavaScript to do these things in Angular today. So if you notice the way you write directives, this funny syntax that looks kind of magical and somehow works, but it like has minification challenges.
And we were thinking, well, what would allow us to have a natural first-class, very expressive language syntax? And could we have any hope of proposing this as a standard that would eventually get into ECMAScript? And so that's what we've been doing. And so I think one way to look at this is, oh, crazy Angular team is going off and splitting everybody apart and having this new standard. No, maybe not standard, this new thing. We've been working really hard on finding partners who want to work with us. And so we'll talk about this on Thursday. But we've been working with the V8 team at Google, the Clojure compiler team at Google, and the TypeScript folks. And recently went to the TC39 meeting when they were in San Francisco a couple weeks ago and talked about the annotations that we want to have. And we basically have a lot of support amongst these big groups and a lot more folks. We need even more people to help us have all the conversations that are necessary to pull these things together. But it's like, let me draw another picture where it's maybe not so unreasonable that these things could come together. So ES6 is part of Xat Script. We threw it in just because we wanted to accelerate people getting on that. It's uncontroversial. It will be on all the browsers. The part on top of that is types. So that, and they're optional. You don't have to use types if you don't want to. But if you do want them, the folks who have done the most work on this are TypeScript folks at Microsoft. And it's also kind of uncontroversial because they picked the syntax that was originally proposed for ECMAScript 4, but never got adopted. It's kind of Pascal-like, but that was part of ActionScript. And the TC39 folks have basically said, yeah, we'll reserve that syntax for you. We haven't agreed on the semantics, but yeah, that syntax can be in there. We'll figure it out. And then the last bit is these metadata annotations and the runtime reflection to get at that information. And these are things that have just been proven in many languages. Objective-C, Java, like a lot of them, C# have metadata that talks about what it is I'm trying to describe. So we think that's probably uncontroversial. Like that, how could I describe documentation bits that isn't in a comment? How could I describe the dependency injection piece or like any of the aspect-oriented things I might want to do with my application? I don't think it's that outlandish. There's a lot of agreement that JavaScript needs to evolve more quickly, and so TC39 is like, instead of calling it ES6, they'll call it, ECMAScript 2015. There'll be a 2016, 2017, and hopefully one of these years, all those Xat Script things can be in there. Did you buy it? Almost.
So can you do AOP with Xat Script?
Well, I brought up AOP. Like logging is the only thing it's good for anyway. So let's move on.
That's fair. No, that sounds pretty cool. Thank you.
Hey, so I had a question about more of the project management of Angular. I find a lot of projects, you see the code reflects the team that's developing it. And so when you have a good project, that usually is reflective of a good team. I guess what advice would you have for us to ensure that our own products, our own Angular projects turn out well? Like what qualities do you see in your team that you would recommend to us?
Not about the Angular team, but at Google, it's a big company. There's like 50,000 people or something crazy there. And some of the folks in HR did studies where they interviewed like over 200 teams. And they asked them, what makes an effective team? And we tried to rate which teams were effective and which ones were not. And tried to tease out what is it about these teams that makes them effective. And it was different answers depending if you are an individual contributor on a team or if you're like a tech lead or a manager. You might have different answers what effectiveness is. But the reasons for effectiveness weren't different. And one of the primary things was trust among the team members. And it kind of comes down to this, like when things are tight and I'm behind, will somebody, if I say I need help, will somebody just pick up something that I need to have happen? And I don't have a question to it. Another big aspect of it is, can I ask questions or bring up ideas I have and feel completely comfortable
that I'm going to be supported in getting my question answered or having my idea treated seriously. And so that's one of the things we work on a lot on the Angular team. And I don't think we're experts or great at it, but we do work on it a lot. So maybe that's not the answer you wanted, but that's what I think about.
I think that sounds great. So support and trust, you really feel make all the difference.
I think empathy is the critical skill we can't get too good at. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Any more questions? All right. Oh, one over here.
What is Google's economic interest in Angular, and how might that influence its evolution?
Oh, yeah, good question. So why does Google do Angular? At the beginning, we did it just because I wanted to. And that was before we were successful. Matter of fact, one of the senior VPs, we after you do things for a while, they want to have a review and say, how's your project going? And we explained how great Angular was and why it was going to be fantastic for all of the projects at Google. And he basically said, you guys are all a bunch of liars. You don't know what you're talking about. Go back to the drawing board. Today, there are about 2,000 apps checked into the Google source repository that we at Google have written on Angular. And so it's actually important to running the business. And there's a lot of folks outside of Google who have built stuff on it. And we have an obligation to support folks and help the web. One other aspect that may not be obvious is Google makes most of our money on the web through advertising. And we actually have a vested interest in making it a nice place to develop and live. And this is why we've invested in Chrome and why we invest in things like web components. Because we like to continue to make money so we can still do cool things like self-driving cars. So it's not it's not a direct correlation. We don't make any money off the Angular project itself. But there are a lot of reasons why Google invests in Angular. Cool.
So could you address, for you personally, how has it been the experience of leading the Google Angular team? How's it been for you, for your career? Has it been fun? Has it been not fun? Has it been a good thing? Just personally, how has it been for you?
Yeah, okay. I was hoping that question wouldn't happen, but I think when I started, Mishko and I we're going to change the world, and hell or high water, we're going to show people that data binding can work in a browser, and you can have testability and high performance code, and a lot of these concepts aren't mutually exclusive. And then people started to use it, and that's when the emotional roller coaster started, because it's this funny thing that as you become successful with something, you kind of tie who you are to it, and if people like it, you feel good, and if people don't like it, you kind of feel bad, which is silly because I don't know why you guys like it or don't like it, but I want you to like it. It hasn't actually. I started at Google as a manager, and I got promoted to another kind of manager. I got promoted to director, and I think none of those had anything to do with Angular. They were for other projects I worked on. But it has been a really good way for me to meet people, both inside Google and outside, and so that's been awesome. So for events like this, it's been great. That makes me really happy. More questions?
So TypeScript and Tracer. Tracer does not compile TypeScript. What's the timeline to get those closely integrated?
So Tracer doesn't compile TypeScript. It almost does. Yeah. So Tracer, the point of Tracer, it was built as a way to prototype new language features so that we can evolve JavaScript faster. And it's been really good for that for us. So we built AtScript into Tracer so that we'd have a way to consume this AtScript syntax and output today's JavaScript ES5, ES6, TypeScript, and Dart. And it's been good. I think for other folks, so I think it's probably a very reasonable way for people who want to cross-compile to ES6. And I don't know that we're going to invest 100%. Well, we probably will invest to get types in there. The TypeScript toolchain is very nice. If you want something that's well supported today, I would say take a look at TypeScript first. I think it's unclear how much of the full suite we can keep up with in Tracer. But here's one thing to think about. We really want to get these parts of Xat Script adopted. And the way the TC39 committee works is they want to see proof that the new proposals actually work in the real world. And they not only want to see proof, but they want to see multiple examples of proof, meaning it would be really good for us if there were multiple cross-compilers that implement the Xat Script bits. And so we are going to work to try and get many, many different versions of cross-compile tools to support Xat Script, which includes TypeScript, including interfaces.
I kind of wanted to share one problem and get your thoughts on it, and then maybe a follow-up to that being, what do you see as the biggest pain point for the community? If you're sitting out here for us, what's the, oh man, that I feel bad moment? So one of our problems right now is we're on 1.2, and we've used a whole bunch of other libraries. The biggest probably being Angular Bootstrap. And there's all these cool things in 1.3, and we're heavily invested, really big app, and we can't upgrade to 1.3 because this project hasn't caught up. Now, short of us just going and contributing to that, do you have any thoughts on that? Is that a problem you see with maybe Angular Bootstrap in the community and other libraries?
Well, I do feel bad about that. And it's hard because so Angular Bootstrap has this blockage for you. You can't upgrade, and it is a problem with open source software. I think one of the ways we're trying to, I mean, I don't have a solution for you, so I also feel bad about that. One of the ways we're trying to help.
Trying to make you feel bad here. So
yeah.
It's not how we want.
I think one of the ways we're trying to help is by first of all creating this nice suite of components called material design, and it's going to be super rich and super awesome and work on desktop, tablet, phone, watch, car, whatever. But also in Angular 2, things are going to be much easier. Well, a lot of things are going to be much easier to migrate because the template syntax is statically analyzable, and so tools can help migration a lot more. If you decide to use types from Xat Script or TypeScript or Dart, then the migration becomes much easier from one to another. I can't solve the problem of there's somehow associated other open source project X that isn't getting the love it deserves. I don't know how to solve that problem, but we are going to work to make the whole ecosystem easier to migrate from one version to another.
I think it solves that by building in some of those components. I think that Angular Bootstrap and Angular, that it's kind of been a bundle up until this point.
Yeah.
So, and then my other follow-up question was just, what else, if you're sitting in our seat, what are some things that you see as a problem from the community side? Is there any other big pain points that you see that?
I think that there's probably a bunch of rough edges, surprises you get when developing an Angular that, like, oh, I didn't know I had to call $apply in this one location. So we see all this sort of cargo cult behavior, people calling $apply in all kinds of crazy places because it's just not obvious and it's our fault. So you have to know too much about a bunch of things in Angular 1. We want to fix that. And I don't know if you've seen Ben Nadel has this nice graph of like, oh, I love Angular. Oh my God. It's fantastic. The project is doomed. Like, greatest framework ever. And we want it to be more like an even slope. So
thank you.
We're working on that.
So I recently stumbled across Aurelia and kind of followed the split there, and I was just looking for a little. Obviously, can't talk about that project, but just some of the philosophy differences. And then we talked earlier about all the proliferation of frameworks, and me facing that, I think, well, I just wish I could write vanilla JavaScript, just maybe write 80, 90% generic stuff and then incorporate it into a framework? How much lock-in do we have going into Angular 2?
That's a great question. So Aurelia is by, if you don't know, is by this guy, Rob Eisenberg. He's super sharp. Worked with us on Angular 2 for a while. And at one point he said, I'm going to merge my Drundle framework with Angular and it'll be one thing. And then he decided, well, I kind of want to do my own thing. And I think like part of it was he works from his home in Florida and we've got a big group in Mountain View. And he's as smart as all of us, or maybe he's smarter than all of us. And you know, being isolated like that, it's really hard to make progress. But then we also had some differences of opinion about the way things should go. And I think, I don't want to put words in Rob's mouth, but I think one of them was around the way we're doing data binding in Angular 2. And where, you know, we get all these nice properties out of having a directed acyclic graph, this, you know, unidirectional data flow. And, you know, Rob wanted to maintain the sort of NG model style of two-way data binding. We've got another style, which we'll talk about in the second keynote at NGConf this week. Remind me what the second part of your question was? Oh, lock-in, yeah, okay. Good. So in Angular 1, we really tried hard to make it so that for your business logic, the core part of your application, you didn't call Angular. And you do call scope, but beyond that, you kind of notice the way you write your controllers, we call us, like we call you at the right time in the application lifecycle. You don't call Angular in particular. And if you separate yourself nicely into services, you have an even nicer abstraction where like all the things that make your application are simple JavaScript classes. And this is maybe another difference between Angular and some other frameworks that require you to inherit from some of their classes. So in Angular 2, we're going another step towards this direction, making a lot more things nicer. And what you'll see is some of the concepts that you had to worry about, like scope in Angular 1, kind of disappear even a little bit more. And so we really want it to feel more and more like it was written, you're just writing to the browser API. It's why we're supporting web components. It's why we're adopting the ECMAScript 6 syntax for modules and other bits, promises. So yeah, we are pushing more in that direction.
Sorry, can you just talk about what your role is on the team and a day in the life of Brad Green?
Okay, what is my role? It's a good question. Actually, I manage, Angular's the small team that I manage. I manage another team that builds our CRM tools at Google. They're internal for our sales force, but it's how we make all our money, so I still feel good about myself. So I spend actually a lot of time with my other teams working on building products with Angular, which is kind of nice, because then I get to go back to the Angular team and say, hey, we encountered this crazy thing. Could we make Angular better? I'm in a unique position, I realize. When I work with the Angular team, it's primarily about vision setting and figuring out where do we want to go with the project? What do we want to do with partnerships? And we do have a lot of partners, thankfully, who want to work with Angular. And then evangelization. So sometimes I come out and talk to you guys. And I don't know, it's a lot of fun for me. Thanks for having me. More questions? All right.
So I've used Angular. I'm a backend guy who kind of took the ride of my life learning Angular. Like,
thank you.
Yeah. So I work at Adobe and we get a sabbatical, we get a month off, and I'd started looking into Angular, and I was, going a different direction. My brother said, "Hey, you should look into Angular." So I spent a lot of the time learning it, and it was like an awesome, trip. I don't know how to put it. It was really interesting to see, and it lined up a lot with the way that I would, if I was smarter, I would probably want to use a lot of those concepts. I'm just wondering on your side, like how much of Angular
was kind of how you saw it originally and how much of it had to evolve from what you saw. Because I see a lot of these cool things that, it's like, oh, the way you do models, scope, directives. I spent a lot of time looking at directives and it just like blew my mind. Just how you were able to tease that out of the language. And I see with Angular 2, a lot of them are kind of changing, So what was the evolution of that? I'd like to know.
Angular has evolved a lot. And the start, it was really data binding, directives, and dependency injection were the core things, the core features that we use to support testability, reducing boilerplate, and some structure in your app. And the rest has been evolution. Like, we had built a lot of apps, and I worked on Gmail for a while, and I saw a lot of the horrible things that happen when you don't have some structural components. And it was a big reaction to the way we had been seeing applications being developed in the early 2000s in JavaScript. And then after that, you guys have taught us a lot. Teams at Google, you guys taught us things that needed to happen in Angular. And it's just now that we've kind of looked back on 5 years of developing Angular and all of the conversations we've had to think about what do we want to do for Angular 2 and how do we simplify it and how do we get rid of all the things you have to know into reducing it to a much smaller set of core concepts, reducing some of these rough edges, unexpected things that I have to know. And hopefully it's going to be really nice. You can tell me.
So for beginners, would you say Angular 2 is going to be easier to learn as compared to 1.x?
I sure hope so. There's a very few core concepts that you can learn about how the templates work. Directives get way simpler. So have you used directives in Angular? Yeah, okay. So you have this huge API surface where there's actually multiple ways to do the same thing, and it's not really clear which one I want. And in Angular 2, there's 3 different kinds of directives, and it's very clear. There's one for elements, one for attributes, and one where you need to control the instantiation of your children in some ways, and we need it for like ngRepeat and ngIf, but most people don't need it. So 2 very simple ways to describe directives. And so we've generalized some things to reduce how much API surface area you need, and then some things we've actually split out so that it's really clear which API I should be using, just to simplify what we're doing. And we have things like the zones that allow me to not worry about this $apply thing. It goes away from the public API surface. So I hope much easier. More questions? I think I'm over time. If there is one more question, I would take it, or if not, I'll say goodnight.
I'll ask you a quick question.
Okay.
So I was out at Facebook for the React.js conf last month or 2 months ago, and I thought it was really cool that I actually met as many Angular core member teams at the conference as I did React guys.
Yeah, they invited us. It was cool.
And then kind of go along with that, not naming other frameworks names, but some frameworks on Twitter kind of come off as like really trolly, So I'm just kind of curious, like, what's your perspective on the relationship between kind of like the main front-end JavaScript frameworks right now? What's your relationship with the other teams? And, is it more like friendly competition? Is it keep your enemies close? You know what I mean? What are you guys learning from each other? Just that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want us all, I feel best when we collaborate. And I think the web development ecosystem is huge and there's room for a lot of players. And so, when we were gathering folks who could help on making Xat Script part of the TC39, we talked to the TypeScript folks and the V8 folks, but we've recently been talking to the Flow folks, and they're super cool guys with great ideas. And we have a meeting set up for next month. We're going to go meet with the React guys and see how can we collaborate. And the Ember guys, we talked to a lot when we were designing our new router, and we've actually been collaborating directly on the new effort around building a command line interface for Angular. And some of the guys in the Ember community have built a command line interface, and they're helping us. And they have this cool build system called Broccoli, which we also love. And so we've been collaborating with them. And I would just like to see a lot more of this, because this is kind of the promise of open source software. It's not a competition, but if I like those bits, I go grab them and I just copy them in with appropriate attribution. the original source. But I think we can get more done if we're actually all talking to each other. And so I want to be doing more of that. Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to questions. Oh, one other thing I should mention, after the keynote, I'm going to announce a Reddit Ask Me Anything link, and you can put questions in there, and we'll have one place to answer everything. And I look forward to it. Thanks.
All right, one final thing. We're just going to do a quick raffle, kind of some giveaways if you want to stick around. If you need to take off, I understand, but you're not going to win. Sorry. Yeah, you're good. I'd like to invite Christina up from RethinkDB. They brought some swag to give away, so we'll raffle that stuff off first.